Thank you, Kayla, and welcome everyone. We'll go through the agenda real quickly. The first order will be my report, which is really looking at the Four Lakes Task Force plan that we have put in place now moving forward, given the significant incident that happened on May 19th. Part of that plan is the acquisition of the Boyce hydro lands that are associated with the lakes. Part of the other thing we'll be doing is giving a review of flood studies and a review of an engineering report on some of our best preliminary plans and costs around what it takes to replace and repair these dams. There'll be a legal update during that process at the acquisition time, and then we'll have a updated just 2020 funding, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. There will be two board votes today, one on the plan that I'll be presenting in my report, and the second is the condemnation process that and suit that we'll be filing will be also discussed. Then we'll open it up for other business as we go forward to do. So again, welcome to the meeting, and we can start with my report. So you're going to run the slides for me, Kayla?
There is one addition. I'm going to have a very brief report on erosion that's going to follow the property acquisition report.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And yeah, we do have there's a lot of work going on in erosion, so we've asked Dave Rothman to give an update right after the GEI study. Right after Joe Colaianne's report. Good. Okay, so could I have approval on the minutes and the from last meeting and the agenda of this meeting?
Motion to approve both.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Aye. Okay. So approved. So let's move to the President's report. This report, let's go back. Oh, sorry, we snuck ahead. This report and other documents associated with the report will be filed on our website afterwards. Stacy, did we put the two-pager on the website already? And this report, basically, there's a two-page document on our website called Four Lakes Task Force Fact Sheet, which is basically a summary of the positions and discussion I'm talking through at this planning session. And I would say it pretty much reflects everything that's in the document if you want to look through that as well. So 2 months ago, we were about a week away from preparing to go out to market for the financing on the acquisition of the property. And obviously that didn't happen given to the events on the 19th, and it fundamentally changed what we were doing. And everything to this point now has been repositioned and pivoted to look at how we still meet the objectives of bringing sustainable lakes, getting the dams repaired, but under a completely different circumstance. And we want to review that with you today. So I'm going to walk through some basic, just walk through the kind of where we are today and then where we need to go in the future. I think everybody understands that a lot of things happened wrong over the last 10, 20 years that got into this incident. But at the end of the day, there's an independent investigation. We know for sure that from observation, an embankment failed on the Edenville Dam, and the Sanford Dam failed because of excess water from the Edenville failure that came down upon that dam. There'll be a lot of causes and issues that come out of this. It won't be one thing, and those are yet to be determined. FERC ordered Boyce to form an independent investigation team. And the Eagle Dam Safety, through the governor's orders, had formed an investigation team around Eagle, and they've joined forces. We have continually communicated that we believe the investigation team is a quality team and it has the expertise to do this investigation. We are concerned that it's not independent from the state, the federal government, or specifically Boyce. It's selecting the team and then has to deal with the compensation of the team. Smallwood and Secord dams were lowered after that event by order of FERC's inspection. We'll go through that a little bit. That has not been the results of some of those inspections. Some of them have not been shared with FERC, and the ones that have been shared with FERC have been under what they call critical infrastructure information, which means we can't see them. We petitioned FERC to see them, and we have petitioned Boyce to provide them to us. They have not. The state of Michigan has challenged Boyce on the inadequacy of inspections and the plans for stabilization of the tobacco spillway. And as we go through it, Boyce is behind on the FERC order compliance. So we're 60 days into this. We've done pretty significant diligence before the project. We haven't been, while we tried to support Boyce during the month of May, we were asked to leave the site in June, and we did not have any time on the site to really go through the studies, but we have a lot of structure to go through, and we formed a preliminary plan around that, and we want to share that with you today. So to me, the challenge here is we have a paradigm that's changed, and there's a new reality for the lake system, but we're right now relying, and still in the position in the last 60 days, on the same system. So if we go to the next slide, I want to say the latest news we have is from the July 15th FERC report. And that was a letter that we posted this morning, I believe. We got it yesterday. And in that report, it's a response to some of the actions FERC has taken. And the summary I would do is he was required to bring the dams down, basically bring the two dams down, Smallwood and Secord, to their spillway levels and do an inspection once they were cleared. That was basically effective May 22nd. He didn't do that examination of the dams on Smallwood, Secord, or Sanford until June 8th, 17 days later than the inspection was requested. And basically put the report into FERC on June 30th for Smallwood, July 9th on Secord, and Sanford is yet to be filed. And so one of the challenges we have is sorting the information from that. We do have the data now on Smallwood from FERC, not from Boyce. There are 30 items of repair or actions on that. 10 of them are related to repairs. The other 24 are related to information he needs to gather around the spillway and quality of the dams. And there was also an admonishment for the fact that the repairs being done have not been done under engineering supervision. So our challenge here is we've been through this cycle before, and I know while Boyce claims he can repair Secord and bring it up for $30,000, it just doesn't seem credible given the fact that FERC hasn't even brought a report back. And if you look at the report from the Federal Energy Regulation Commissioner, FERC, for Smallwood, they're requiring him to come back with those 34 points addressed in a program and plan by August. So the fact that Secord hasn't come out, it's hard to imagine that that's going to happen. In the meantime, nothing is happening on Sanford Dam and Wixom Lake. The Four Lakes Task Force, a lot of volunteers, the counties, federal agencies and state agencies are engaged on that lake bottoms, but we have not really seen Boyce tied into that. So to me, we have a really clear recognition that we cannot continue to run this the same way, and we have to kind of look at a different paradigm to running it. So if we go to the next slide, please. Never mind. The president, so I'd like just to make a couple points here. The president has approved a major disaster declaration requested by the governor. This is a change. We sit in a reality that's different than what's been projected through the kind of letter writing between FERC and Boyce in the past. All four dams are going to be required to meet current standard of practice for dam engineering and have appropriate spillway capacity. The reality is the system failed, and people are re-looking at that, and these systems will not come up. until there's a clear view from the state and federal government and the counties. But I also argue the communities should not and cannot require anything less than having safe, operable dams to manage their lakes. The other challenge we have that's different is the long-term financing, grants. Nobody's going to provide long-term financing unless you have a long-term asset. So when people look at the investment in this size, we're going to need to be looking at a 75 service life to all 4 of these lakes. And if you're going to make these kind of changes, it's appropriate to think of these as a long-term investment for this generation and the next 2 or 3. And while the independent investigations will show causes, one thing is clear: the system failed to protect people and property. And so as we go implement this again, we can't build the same system with the same issues. It's got to be a 2024 system, not a 1924 system. And so our Four Lakes Task Force plan going forward reflects that reality. And so it's not an easy reality and it's not a cheap reality, but it is what we have to move forward with. There's really only 3 choices we have. We can wait for the federal government, the state, and Boyce to come up with a solution for us. Or we can each go on our own in each association, or we can refocus our effort and work on the implementation of this program that we have going forward. And that's what the Four Lakes Task Force has chosen to do, and we'll move forward on that. And we'll give you our logic as we go through this plan to implement. I wanted to give you a little background. I think we've covered these things many times before, but I always feel it's important to really establish why we're here and under what authority as it relates to the community and what their opportunities are. And it starts with the fact that private ownership of a hydro dam is still a viable way to have a dam in the state of Michigan in the United States. But if a dam's this size, if you don't have hydropower, the only way to have an impounded lake with dams is through Part 307 of the inland lake level of the Michigan Natural Resource Environmental Protection Plan. It allows the establishment for legal lake levels. And the reality, if a hydro dam is no longer running under a FERC license to operate, and Part 307 legal lake level is the only way property owners would legally be entitled to the existence of the lake. In other words, the lake is private property, the homeowners are private property. Without a lake level set by the community and the county, there is no lake. And the federal government can override the state, and they do it with the federal FERC license. There was no precedent beforehand by any elected body to put that establishment in place where we had a backup to have a state legal lake level behind the federal government. That was an exposure, and we closed that exposure in May of 2019 after the lake associations formed the Four Lakes Task Force, went through the counties and got a resolution, went to the circuit courts of both Gladwin and Midland County, established these lake levels along with the required special assessment district, and then established the Four Lakes Task Force as the authority on behalf of the county to manage the implementation through acquisition improvement of the dams and then the operations. This was a multi-million-dollar effort. This was a huge effort. Without this in place, we have no right as a property owner to argue a legal lake, and we'd have to start this process all over again, which would be almost impossible. So it's been a huge effort, and it's critical that the community understands that and stand, or there simply are not going to be lakes in the area. The next slide. We're all rooting for it. We're all rooting for the slide to come up. Okay. Are we stuck?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. My fault. The Four Lakes Task Force, and I want to clear up 2 things. One is the Four Lakes Task Force, and the other is kind of how the property ownership is done. Four Lakes is a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm sure there are many people on the call that work for nonprofits. It was formed by the lake associations in 2018 to support the counties in obtaining this court order and acquiring the lakes and dam properties. The contract with the county has them properties going to the county, not staying with the Four Lakes Task Force. The Four Lakes Task Force, through contract and through resolution and through court order, is working on behalf of the county and the Special Assessment District. The way the board members are selected, they're nominated from their lake associations. They are volunteers and they're not compensated. 2 board members, because they're tied over from the counties, because we have a relationship with that. 1 from Gladwin and 1 from Midland County. And no board member has or can profit from this engagement as a board member. And anybody on a nonprofit, I think, understands that, and everybody should understand that a nonprofit, any funds that collected, either has to stay in that nonprofit or go to another nonprofit or charity. So the idea that there's money involved in this for other people other than the community is wrong. We have experts that I also want to point out. We've hired quality folks both regionally and nationally in our skills around civil engineering, hydro, dam engineering, dam operations, legal services, communications, and auditing. So it's a capability with the diligence we've had to move forward and have a quality implementation as we work on. There's some confusion around the Four Lakes operations or flow. It is and always was owned 100% by the Four Lakes Task Force and put in place simply to coordinate the acquisition and operations from Boise. In other words, as a nonprofit, you can't run a for-profit activity, and the counties can't really run a hydroelectricity as a utility for the legally reviewed with everybody. And at this point in time, because of where we're going, it's no longer needed, and we will be looking at how we kind of sunset it. But we're right now, that's almost getting towards a discontinued operation. No board member no board member, we didn't write that right, but no board member other than Flo. The only ownership of the Four Lakes operations is the Four Lakes Task Force. No board member, myself, the board members, the officers of the Four Lakes have ever owned any stock in that, or was any stock ever issued. It was a mechanical way to have ownership between Four Lakes Task Force and Flo and have a contract with the county that would work for everybody. So the ownership of the dam is sometimes confusing. There's several legal entities. I won't go through those. They're all fully operational control. Boise Hydro, since it acquired the property in 2006, and regulated by FERC. Boise lost the bottomlands in Wixom and Sanford Lakes in Midland County over a tax dispute. So the bottomlands for all of Sanford and the Midland County portion of Wixom Lakes are owned by the Four Lakes Task Force. These properties will basically return to ownership, and as we go through the acquisition of the other properties, they'll go directly to the counties. FERC, I'm sorry, I was just taking a drink of water. The hydro power license from Edenville on September 28th. A lot of letter and between that discussion when it occurred, but the reality is the bottom line was because of Boise's long-standing failure to increase the project's spillway capacity to safely pass flood flow. And then at that point in time, the Edenville Dam was moved to oversight by Michigan Eagle Dam Safety. And now both parties are in the process of suing each other between Boise and the Eagles. We were in the process of acquiring the dams, then improving and repairing the dams on behalf of the counties through an agreement with the Boise Trust and their entities. That was to start in 2020. There were some delays, but the closing had moved to June 1. We were, like I said, in the middle of financing, and with the incident, that agreement cannot and is not proceeding, and Boise has been communicated that. Okay, now you can move. And I think the critical thing we're saying is Boyce has acknowledged to FERC that it could not invest to keep the dams in compliance. The dams have been invested in. That's why we got involved with Boyce to transfer the ownership away from a private ownership model where simply the amount of power on these dams, the size of the lakes relative to the amount of power they can generate. Mueller was the Boyce Hydropower co-manager, has stated it is beyond Boyce's capability to address the damages. He's got post-flood debris to remove, stabilization of lakes, dam improvements on the two lakes, and restoration of the other two lakes dams. He's has over $6 million of debt. It's not in a position that this is a sustainable model for any of the communities as we go forward. So what is our plan? We have basically 3 steps, and to acknowledge you, they're pretty big steps. Out of necessity, the county has approved after this event to acquire the properties from Boyce through condemnation. And some people on the phone will think condemnation is not like you have an old house that you're going to tear down. In this case, through eminent domain, we're going to get a house that is torn down and rebuild it up. And so I think the key thing here is the condemnation word kind of sometimes is a little confusing. The reality is we gave Boyce a offer for the property. It was for the amount we paid him up to that point and no more. That's more than the property is worth. We believe the property right now is worth 0 because of the amount of erosion or amount of liability, erosion, dam stability, repairs needed. The best and only purpose for this property is his lakes. And so that has to be repaired and put back. And that's why we're going after the offer to Boyce, and now we're going to file suit with Boyce out of the necessity to need the property for the community. The thing we're working on right now is to stabilize all 4 dams. We don't have the restoration repair works are underway, or planning is underway, and this debris needs to be removed and erosion needs to be managed. It is a significant effort just on itself to get these lakes to the point where we're comfortable that they can go through the winters without major erosion and impact to other infrastructure and be safe to work from. And then we need to start and rebuild a repair program. We're going to give you some very big numbers. And I know that we were talking before the dams were destroyed there in Edenville and Sanford. We were talking in the 30 to 40, not to exceed $35 million to acquire and repair the lakes. Now we put a 0 on top of that. We recognize that's a significant number. We're going to post the engineering opinions on this. Those opinions are very widely in their range, but there's no expert that we can find that puts this number under about 200 million, and our own analysis with our own experts are putting that range in there as well. The view is it's significantly higher if it has hydropower on it, and the return from hydropower and the complexity of redoing all that is very likely not worth doing. And so this is primarily focused on restoring these dams to provide for, and repairing these dams to provide for lake level, but long-term likely not hydro. This is not an estimate. It's factored in. It's an opinion. It's first phase planning, cost issues, and but the scale is large, and it needs to be refined as we go forward. And every engineer that looks at it can find $20 million to move up into it, or $30 million to move down. That's not the thing. In the last 30 days, we've established a base area to get a planning number to understand how big the problem is and how we have to work on it. We're going to go through the detail of that in the meeting today. The first part of 2021, we'll have these plans refined. We will go through the community and explain them. We need to get approval from the counties, again, to proceed with this kind of project, obviously. And then we must submit these plans to the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan has a administrative rule that if a dam fails, it needs to be submitted for a plan within a year, or they start the whole process over. That would be very costly. So we're really trying to make sure we focus on getting the plan in place, getting the community committed, and moving forward. And frankly, we only have 10 months is not a lot of time working through things through government. So it's a very key aspect of this and why we're doing these things together, all three of these together, not one at a time. So let me go through some of the issues. First of all, lawsuits. There's multiple lawsuits related to this matter. A lot of class action suits being developed. People have come to us and asked if they should be joining. Honestly, we really cannot have a position on a lake owner wanting to join a class. The counties and Four Lakes Task Force are named in some of the lawsuits, and we maintain those lawsuits against the counties and Four Lakes Task Force are without merit. It's kind of hard for me to conceive, really, because the class will be the lake owners, I hope, for most of these class actions. And if they sue Four Lakes Task Force, the only resource that we have to get the money for the lake owners is a special assessment district. So, first of all, we don't have any money other than what we collect in donations or special assessments or grants. And so, it seems kind of ridiculous that we're going to be sued on this thing. We have what we believe is immunity with the county, but I think right now the view is in my personal view, that Boyce and the state of Michigan files lawsuits with each other. The story's pretty attractive to class action lawyers in that, hey, it's somebody with big pockets like the state of Michigan. I don't think anybody sees Boyce. I mean, Boyce is in there, but I think people see, just like they've done in Flint and other places, large pockets to go work on. And so we're kind of stuck in the middle of that. We're working against that, but our view is that we'll get, that's not an issue that we're going to have to deal with, but we don't believe that we don't believe that these cases against us are valid. The challenge, though, that we had too, though, is Boyce has filed kind of the story of the community and the state made him do this, and which is he's a responsible operator. It's just a very simple premise that's wrong, but it's created a lot of noise as he's put stuff out to work through. I wanted to cover the environmental and recreational studies. A few. The state and Boyce are in a legal lawsuit over environmental damage to mussels as a result of the 2019 drawdown. Four Lakes Task Force is not involved in the litigation. Four Lakes Task Force did agree to contribute $1 million towards studies, monitoring, conservation efforts to benefit the freshwater mussel ecosystem in all four lakes, and to determine how the legal negative impacts on the ecosystem and conserve the environment. These are statements out of the agreement with the state. We will post those today. Oh, they're already posted today. Good. I think the important thing to recognize, I've looked through all these emails that Boyce's lawyer had released under non-disclosure with the state, and most of them are talking about two people negotiating about our position. I looked at this and felt that we need to just give you the agreement. It's not that, my view is this is exactly what we should be doing. We had an issue with the state arguing about when you could do dam safety versus managing the environment, and there was not a viewpoint from anybody in the room in the state of how you manage this issue. And so our way to facilitate this was to agree to do this study starting in 2024 and over an unlimited amount of time, but capped at $1 million, because we fundamentally couldn't get through the legal issue here with Boyce in the state, and we couldn't have a way to have a position on how to manage the dams with this lawsuit hanging over us. So we went into this agreement, and like all the things I've been talking before, we have to do a lot of management within the special assessment around environment, and mussels we're going to be one, and so we might as well step up to it and manage it. So there's no apologies here, and there's no conspiracy here. The state and the Boyce are in a legal lawsuit, and we were trying to get our way through this to manage it, and that was our solution. We did not agree to pay fines or damages for Boyce or to the state of Michigan. That wasn't the program. The program was the lawyers were arguing about the price. We had to get to a system that we could manage going forward for our future, the $30 million or so. We've submitted several projects already requesting federal support. As most know, with FEMA and others, you're not going to get 100% support, but we're working on that right now to work through it. We're engaged with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood studies and planning assistance. There's funding there for that. And also we're looking at, well, I think it's a lot area to go for. It's just how we look at future support, project support from the U.S. Army Corps. So early days as we scope this project out, but we are engaged with them as a resource to kind of work through this. I would also have to say we're getting significant support from the counties, from our state senators, from our state representative, from our congressmen, from our senators in Washington in helping us implement this plan and looking for funds and working through. So I really feel good that everybody's on board. We make no, this is a big task to live through, but we're tight on that. I think what everybody has to recognize is nobody's going to pay 100% for this. The special assessment district will need to be a major source of funding. So almost all these things are structured around this assumption that the local entity pays, and that will be the homeowners will have to pay an assessment. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it will be part of that sourcing fund, and our plan is not to do that right away. Okay, and that's why I wanted to finish with, not finish with, but just summarize. So there's a lot of noise out there in the community on what the number is going to be. I would just say that the methodology done before May 2019 is no longer valid. A new methodology needs to be developed. We don't have an estimate on that because we don't even have the framing of it. It'll be probably a year or so at least before we do. There are no plans for assessment timing, but certainly we do not expect it to be any earlier than 2022. And if you're hearing numbers being reported by others, it's speculation. It's not fact. And it's also not practical for the Secord and Smallwood Lake communities to pay for Sanford or Edenville Dam restoration. So we're already in our corners about who's going to pay for what cost. And clearly with this kind of number where you'll see that one community has to build a dam for $100 million, another's got a different number. This is going to be different. We're going to have to be challenged on that. And we also don't know how much federal money. It's a basically rehabilitation and almost replacement program for Sanford and Edenville. And it's bringing Smallwood and Secord, now that we've seen what's happened to Edenville, to a level of standard to make sure that those dams are fixed as well. I think it's also important to recognize, and Ron will bring these up, that none of these dams are formed to standard as we went through this flood. In other words, they all flooded. People got flooded, and the dams didn't overcome. That's not supposed to happen with a dam. They're not supposed to flood before they get to their crest. So these dams didn't do their job. Edenville certainly didn't. The design around Sanford, that it would just kind of fall in this kind of model and not think about cascading is poor. But Smallwood and Secord, you'll see, for the long run, needs significant repairs as well. Clearly not replacement kind of numbers, but to get them to standards, that's the type of numbers we're looking at. Quickly on the recovery, because give you a viewpoint. On the top of that, the milestones are starting from kind of May 19th. We are trying to acquire the property before the end of the year so we actually have control of it. A fair amount of court things to go through that. We are looking at kind of getting approval in front of the counties early in the next year, and the state submittal, if you look at the top line, is really important. And then somewhere in 2022, hopefully we have a mindset of how much federal funding, state funding, what kind of financing we'll need going forward, and we'll kind of work from that program as we work on. The other part of this then is the recovery effort is really this cleanup and erosion. Kind of basically we're going to have to do these flood and studies to make sure they inform the dams, but also deal with the environmental structure that'll be going forward. And then whatever we do in terms of those studies, we have to follow up with monitoring both in the river flows and the and the environmental monitoring. That'll come in a series of projects and effort as we go forward. And you can see these dams on the areas that we kind of think that Smallwood and Secord have kind of a 2023-2024. Edenville are more, and Sanford are more in the 25 type of time frame. There's a lot of contingency on those numbers, just like there are with the cost numbers. And so we'll have to kind of work through that as well to work through. Ron will go through a little bit of the numbers there to give you a feeling to do. The other thing I know is that this is a very significant challenge, and throwing out reports, with a 60-page engineering report, we want to be transparent on those things, but there needs to be more dialogue about what's going on. The idea here is to have monthly webinars between the board meetings, probably focused on specific topics, probably going into a level of detail more. We want to have a lake-by-lake webinar. I know the Sanford Secord Lake, I think, has an association has a meeting on Saturday that I'll be at with the board members, but we want to basically be able to go through and have a kind of review lake by lake of what we're talking about. So we'll get a level here, but I think we'll want to go further. We're trying to put more on the Four Lakes Task Force websites. In the past, the associations did that, but you'll see more FERC communications and filings, Eagles postings, our communications. We are trying to put a search feature on this because I think we find a lot of questions are being asked, and there's a lot of answers on there, but trying to get to the thing. So get to the right answer that you're looking for. So we'll be doing that. And we would note that we've had this document library out there for a while, and a lot of the documents out there. And so sometimes we'll try to kind of produce that and kind of educate people more on what's already out there. We'll increase our monthly newsletters and kind of look at quarterly mailings and stuff to do. We're not finding that the basis for a policy around our Facebook is working very well. We're not going to engage in a lot of comments on Facebook in the future, except to post the updates, because we're finding that it's much better to have a consolidated view where people can get to a source of our information that we view for. If other sites have, people have other viewpoints, we want to take them and understand them and factor them in, but we just don't have the energy and time to go through and respond to every comment that's on Facebook that's already been addressed before. And so we got to get more discipline around that. I know that will disappoint some people, but we want to get focused to make sure we get the right information out, that we answer the questions, and that we're efficient in doing that. Okay, next slide, which is kind of my finish right now, is I really don't know of any alternative if I'm a lake owner, which I am, to look at how this is going to get accomplished. It's not going to get accomplished by somebody from Washington, D.C. or Lansing coming up and helping us. It's going to come from the communities working through their lake associations, working together with the Four Lakes Task Force, with a lot of help from the state and federal government. That's the only way to bring back these lakes. And we can wait for the federal government. That doesn't work that way. The federal government is here to help us. I think we've been very pleased with their reactions to the state and federal agencies, but we have to put the plan together and we have to move forward and we have to ask for their support. They're just not going to tell us what to do. And if we don't work under this structure, this is our legal right to have a lake. It's a hard journey, and it's also our it's our responsibility to put the lake structure in place because nobody else is going to do it for us. So we think we have a plan in place. We're really going to need community support. We frankly are volunteers on the board. We have a lot of volunteers helping right now. We need a lot more, and we want you to be understanding the programs we're going through and helping us through the process of engaging in the lake associations and working on solving this problem. So I appreciate your listening to us, and we'll move to the next topic, which I think is our lawyer, which is always exciting. So he's got some legal updates of just how we're going through the acquisition of the property for the board to be informed so they can vote going forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Colaianne with the law firm of Clark Hill. I've been handling this matter with regard to the acquisition of the properties related to the Boyce dams, all 4 dams, and the lake properties. These properties include the properties, not just where the dams are physically located, but also the bottomlands. The bottomlands of Sanford, we technically, the Four Lakes Task Force currently owns. However, we do not own the bottomlands of the other 3 dams. In December, we entered into a purchase agreement that was amended to close on a first installment or option payment that was scheduled for June 1st. Obviously, on May 19th, as Dave has indicated, that all changed. The purchase agreement required Boyce to transfer the property in an as-is condition as of December 31st, 2019. So obviously with the damages to Edenville and the Sanford dams, that did not take place. We put Boyce on notice that we wouldn't be proceeding in accordance with that purchase agreement. We began looking at options on how to acquire or what we needed to do to acquire the property, as Dave has indicated, most of the federal and state assistance requires that the property be held by a public agency or held in the name of the public. The Four Lakes Task Force, while certainly is a 501c3 charitable organization, it has the delegated authority of the two counties. That action took place back in 2018, and in 2019 the lake levels were set on petition between the two counties of Gladwin and Midland, and the lake level was set by Judge Karras in May of 2019. As we move forward and we were not able to proceed with the purchase agreement, one of the options that we have under Part 307 of the Michigan Natural Resources Environmental Protection Act is the authority to exercise eminent domain. The two counties are authorized under Section 30710 MCL 324-30710 to exercise the authority of eminent domain to acquire the properties. On June 9th, 2020, both counties of Board of Commissioners adopted resolutions finding that there was a necessity to acquire the properties that were part of the discussion or part of the purchase agreement, and authorized the Four Lakes Task Force to proceed with a number of responsibilities pursuant to those resolutions, namely to negotiate with Boyce, and if we're unable to negotiate with Boyce on the acquisition of the property, to proceed with condemnation. At this juncture, we intend to file a condemnation complaint against the Boyce entities and other interests in accordance with the Uniform Condemnation Procedures Act. That process is somewhat of a two-step process for those that are not familiar with eminent domain. The first process involves making a good faith written offer and then filing a declaration of taking and subsequently filing a complaint in condemnation. The two-step process, once you file the complaint, there is the property owner has a right to contest whether there's a necessity for taking the property. And then the second part is justifying what constitutes just compensation. At this time, we feel our market study has demonstrated that given the cost of the restoration of the dams, the cleanup of the debris, and the highest and best use of the properties being lake properties, the reality is it's a negative value in terms of the value of these properties. We intend to file a complaint within the next day or two to acquire the property, in which case we would set a hearing shortly thereafter on which we will ask for immediate possession of the property.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Rothman. I'm board member of the Four Lakes Task Force, and I chair the Environmental Operations and Safety Committee. The topic I want to talk to you about today is shoreline erosion. When we had our flood event on May the 19th, a number of properties were damaged by erosion as the floodwaters rose, and then especially in Edenville as the dam broke and the floodwaters rushed away. Since the May 19th event, we've had a number of rainstorms. Every one of those has created additional erosion damage. We know we're going to have to deal with this around the lakes. Sanford and Wixom Lake have the worst erosion problems, but we're seeing erosion problems on other lakes as well. So the task force has taken on the role that Boyce is supposed to be fulfilling to deal with erosion around the lakes. One of the first things we did was to host 2 erosion engineering fairs. These were operations we carried out at the Beaverton High School and at Meridian High School, where we had professional civil engineers available for residents around the Four Lakes to consult on the erosion problems that these individuals were having. We had over 200 property owners show up and participate in these engineering fairs. We captured all of the information we could about the property owners, about their property, photographs they brought with them, and suggestions for what they could do with their property if the remediation work they could do was simple, like planting grass and putting down erosion mats. But there are some properties that are going to need more attention than that. So we are visiting the properties around the lakes. We're entering information about the erosion damage at those properties into a GIS application. We're working with Midland County on that. Many of the properties we're visiting are ones that have either belonged to people who attended the engineering fairs, or there are people who contacted us directly about erosion damage that they have. We've trained some engineers, we've trained some volunteers, I should say, to serve as engineers to do visits to the individual properties and complete a damage assessment. We're now working with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to get funding for the properties that we've looked at and that need significant repair work. Natural Resource Conservation Service is the organization that deals with erosion damage nationwide, and they particularly show up in cases like this because they know there will be a lot of erosion damage around our lakes. If you attended the erosion fairs, your information is already in our database. We already know about you. Visits by the NRCS to properties have already begun. I hosted some visits in my lakefront community yesterday. NRCS is pulling together pictures so they can get an idea of the extent of damage, and they can begin to request from Congress the money that's required to help us recover from the erosion damage. Next slide, please. Now, I've looked at the number of entries we have in our database. We have a little over 200 properties that have reported erosion damage. That's quite a few, but I don't think that's the full extent of the erosion damage that's gone on around the lakes. And so we are encouraging people who have erosion damage, who have not contacted us through the erosion fairs or contacted us directly through our website or by phone, to do so. Reach out now. There's a limited period of time in which we can get your property entered into the Natural Resource Conservation Service database to get money from them to help with repair of erosion. The most effective way to contact us is by email, because we only have one person answering the phones. So use the email address. You can find a way to contact us on the Four Lakes Task Force website. The email address is posted on this slide, and I hope that if you need to contact us, you're copying that down. In your email, you need to give us some information, including your name, address, phone number, and a brief description of what's going on. If you need to call, if you don't have access to email or you prefer to call, then the number posted here, 989-941-3005, is the number you should use. But again, I encourage anyone who's got erosion damage that has not been reported at an erosion fair or through contact directly with the Four Lakes Task Force, get in touch with us and don't wait very long, because eventually the window closes for getting help from the Natural Resource Conservation Service on repairing erosion damage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Ron Hansen, civil engineer, professional surveyor with the Spicer Group. What I wanted to do today is update you on the preliminary dam reconstruction and repair efforts, including discussion on the probable maximum flood study that the Four Lakes Task Force completed, and also the generation of planning level cost estimates and designs for restoration and repair. So prior to the May 19th flood event, the Four Lakes Task Force had commissioned the completion of a probable maximum flood study, or a PMF study. We were in the process of evaluating this. We had contracted with Ayers Associates and Spicer Group, and GAI consultants were also providing input. So just to be clear, a probable maximum flood, as defined by FERC, is the flood that may be expected from the most severe combination of critical meteorological and hydrological conditions that are reasonably possible in a particular drainage area. And the probable maximum flood is a flow rate, and the water flow is calculated based on the amount of precipitation. So associated with the probable maximum flood is a probable maximum precipitation. In this region, that's developed from a study completed in 1993. It's called the Wisconsin-Michigan PMP study. So very generally, a one-day PMP rainfall event in this area would be 16 inches of rain across the entire watershed. So the reasoning for completing the PMF study, the Four Lakes Task Force was preparing to make significant investments into the dams and bring the dams into compliance with state and federal regulations. The last study that had been completed was done in 1994, And so we wanted to use updated data and technology and calculate the probable maximum flood for each dam so that we had a good basis of design moving forward. Correct. And Dave just reminded me that the question section is open. So here's the summary of the probable maximum flood study. You can see on the screen a chart. It lists each dam, and then it lists the flow rate that was calculated as part of the study. So for Sanford Dam, you have 80,600 cubic feet per second. For Edenville Dam, you have 80,900 cubic feet per second. Smallwood Dam is 41,200, and Secord is 29,400. In the next column, you'll see what the previously reported, go back. So in the next column, you'll see what the previously reported spillway capacity, and at Sanford Dam, that's 37,000. Edenville Dam, 26,500. Smallwood, 40,900. So Smallwood was pretty close to meeting the probable maximum flood. And then at Secord Dam, 11,000. So the significance of this, what we're showing here is that the dams do not, 3 of the dams are significantly below the federal requirement for spillway capacity. Another important thing to note on this slide, very initial estimates, of course there are forensic analysis and detailed studies that are being completed, but the initial estimates of the flow rate at the Edenville Dam at the time of failure was 20,000 cubic feet per second. And at that time of failure, there were numerous homes that were flooded, and it's important to recognize that this flood event was nowhere near a probable maximum flood. It's a position of the Four Lakes Task Force as we're moving forward that it's not acceptable for homes to be flooded when the dam spillways have yet to reach their capacity. So now we wanted to review what the current dam safety design standards are. So we have 2 sets of design standards, one being the federal design standards, which are regulated by FERC, and the second being the state of Michigan design standards, which are regulated by EGLE. When we look at the FERC criteria for spillway, for the Sanford Dam is required to have spillway capacity adequate to handle what we call the inflow design flood. The inflow design flood for the Sanford Dam, perhaps the simplest definition is the Sanford Dam would be submerged and therefore additional threat to life and property from a dam breach would not occur. That was somewhat observed during the storm event. For people that have seen the videos and watched the footage, they would recognize that the water elevation on the downstream side of the Sanford Dam was very close to the water elevation on the upstream side during the peak of the flood. On the Sanford Dam, the previously accepted value by FERC for this inflow design flood was 37,000 cubic feet per second, roughly half of the previously accepted PMF flow rate. And then Smallwood and Secord, and if Edenville was still regulated under FERC, this would apply to Edenville too. In these cases, these 3 dams, the federal requirement would be to pass the PMF flood event. When we look at the state of Michigan criteria, the state of Michigan has different categories for high hazard dams. It's based on the amount of water that the dam is holding back. So dams that hold back a significant amount of water in terms of height would be required to pass the half PMF. In this case, Edenville and Secord dams are required to pass the half PMF, and the Sanford and the Smallwood dams are required to pass a 200-year storm. So the flow rate, the amount of water flow for the 200-year storm is lesser than the amount of water flow for the half PMF. It is important to note that currently the state of Michigan does not have regulatory authority over Sanford, Smallwood, and Secord. So further analysis would be required to update these PMF and half PMF values And this analysis would include an updating of the PMF study and incorporation of the data we collected from the May 19th storm event. So the next thing that I wanted to get into now is, so the PMF study, that was work that was ongoing prior to the flood event. Then the flood event happened. We reached out to GEI Consulting after the flood event, and we did that for the purposes of planning. Oops, back, yep. So what GEI did is they produced a report. This report is on the website. Spicer Group and Essex Partnership provided input to GEI on the report. I'm going to summarize the report in this presentation, but you can go to the website right now and see it. The report was prepared for planning level purposes and develop design concepts for discussion purposes as we move forward with the reconstruction efforts. Keep in mind the content in the report is preliminary, and detailed engineering and environmental studies must be completed to confirm all the assumptions. But here are the basic assumptions. Number one, it is assumed that a complete reconstruction will be needed for the Sanford Dam and the majority of the Edenville Dam. Number two, it's been assumed that Smallwood and Secord dams can be rehabilitated and repaired. There would be significant efforts to rehabilitate and repair. And then the third assumption is, as we're moving forward, we are not looking at restoring hydropower. And this is based on economics, the cost to restore the dam and the amount of time that it would take to restore the dam. So, design criteria that are included in these assumptions. Number one, when we walk away from all of this, we want the dams to be restored to provide a 75-year service life. We want the dams to meet current standards of practice for dam engineering. And we also want the dams to meet all of the state of Michigan dam safety requirements, being able to pass a half PMF, and also to meet our cascading capacity, meaning the dam downstream can accept the flow from the dam upstream. So now I want to talk briefly about what is in the GEI report, and we'll start with the Sanford and Edenville dams, again, the reconstruction. So we're anticipating the construction of new primary spillways. When you look at the dams the way they were prior constructed, you saw where the gates and the concretes were. That's the primary spillway. What we're saying with the reconstruction is we want the primary spillways to pass at a minimum the 100-year storm with flood protection for the upstream folks. Also, we're talking about reconstructing and raising the embankments and constructing new auxiliary spillways. So I have some examples. What prior existed or what presently exists on these dams are what we call radial gates or Tainer gates. These are the gates that control the water elevations and the gates that need to be lifted during flood events. Moving into the future, we would look at removing the Tainer gates, the radial gates, and replacing them what we call a crest gate. The crest gates fold down instead of going up, and so they're a little more fail-safe than the Tainer gates in the event that it's easier to lower a gate with the water than it is to raise the gate. So this picture is an example of a crest gate. This is the direction that is being pursued. So the crest gates, the primary spillway, those are operated. Those handle the day-to-day flows. In the event of an extreme storm event, we have what we call an auxiliary spillway. Auxiliary spillways do not require operations. They are passive spillways that they work on their own, and they activate during large storm events when the crest gates when the primary spillway needs additional capacity. So this is an example of an auxiliary spillway that you see in this picture. So when we're talking about Sanford Dam, we would have the primary spillway, we would have the auxiliary spillway, well, and there would be one of each. When we're talking about the Edenville Dam, you would see one primary spillway on the Tobacco River side, one primary on the Tittabawassee, and one auxiliary on both sides. And then the third component is the embankment. So the detail for the embankment that is shown on the screen here is an improvement from the embankment as it existed before the dam failure. The most significant difference is the installation of what we call a sheet pile cutoff wall in the center of the dam. Now, currently the Edenville Dam did not have a sheet pile cutoff wall through the entire embankment, and the Secord Dam nor the Sanford Dam do either. The blue line that you see in the middle, that represents the sheet pile. So sheet pile would go for the entire length of the embankment. And then there would be fill, engineered fill put on both sides of the sheet pile. The embankment would be widened to a 20-foot top width. The slopes would be flattened to 2.5 on one. And then a seepage drain system would be installed. And that's what you see highlighted in yellow on this screen. It's natural for water to seep through embankments. The idea behind the drainage is that you collect the seepage and you channel it to a tow drain pipe and you release the tow drain pipe to the atmosphere. I want to talk briefly now about the Secord and Smallwood Dam rehabilitation. Again, here there would be components of the existing dam that would be utilized. We would rehabilitate it. We would look at, again, removing the existing tainter gates and replacing them with crest gates. We would also look at lowering the crest elevation on these gates so that we can increase spillway capacity, thus increasing flood control capacity. We would look at rehabilitating the embankment with sheet pile and fill. We would look at rehabilitating the existing concrete portions of the Smallwood and Secord Dam. I think it's important to realize that where you see the concrete on the dams right now, they're hollow on the inside. So we would look at filling that hollow area with what we call a grout fill and underpinning. Then each dam would have a passive auxiliary spillway with the ability to increase capacity to reduce flooding for the upstream folks. And then armoring the dams with riprap to protect against erosion. So I'll start with Secord Dam. What you see on the screen here is a schematic of the concept for the auxiliary spillway. Right now that would be looked at being placed on the east side of the dam. Again, this would be a passive spillway where when the water reached high elevations, it would start to overflow the spillway and be routed down to the Tittabawassee River. And then the other component of the Secord Dam rehabilitation is flattening the slope on the embankment. The slope on the embankment in some areas right now does not meet 2.5 on one vertical. We would also look at widening the slope on the embankment. Again, when the Edenville Dam failed, based on observations of video, it looked like the embankment failed. Another primary component for the Secord Dam is to install the sheet pile throughout the embankment. So that's where it says the sheet pile cutoff wall. So this is a cross section. The portion that you see highlighted with blue, that would represent what we call micropile or new piles that would go underneath the dam, under the concrete portion of the dam. The portions that you see highlighted in light yellow, that is where the existing concrete structure exists. That concrete structure is hollow in the middle. and so that would be filled with cellular concrete fill. The reason we would need the piles is the filling of the dam adds extra weight. That weight needs to sit on piles so the dam does not settle. Also in the, go ahead, you can go to the next one. And then to talk about the embankment or the earthen part of the dam, the portions on Secord, the portions of the earthen embankment that exist would be left in place. We would look at putting a sheet pile cutoff wall through the middle of the embankment, and then increasing the size of the embankment on the downstream side so that the top would be 20 feet wide and that the slope of the embankment would be 2.5 on 1. Talk about the Smallwood Dam now. So the Smallwood Dam does have sheet pile through the center of the dam at this point in time. The Smallwood Dam would need embankment repairs. The areas on the downstream side of the dam where you see the shaded in red, we would look at embankment repairs there. And then on the east portion of the dam, we would look at improving the auxiliary spillway capacity. So just to kind of summarize the position of the four lakes on the probable opinion of cost that GEI presented with us. First of all, these are concepts and they're rough budgetary estimates. Again, for the Sanford and Edenville Dam, we're basically looking at total replacement cost. Again, the flood studies, the PMF study that I shared with you suggests that the maximum floods are going to be greater when we look into the future. And when we look at the Smallwood and Secord repairs, you know, the estimates are higher than previously talked about. The reason for those are we are expecting that the dams would be brought into current engineering standards and improved for flood control, that the embankments would be improved, new spillways would be added, and the aging concrete would be addressed. Dave had already shared the numbers, but the reconstruction and repair number is $338 million to meet the state requirements. That this again assumes no hydropower generation, and this also assumes that each dam would have capacity to pass the half PMF. These are planning level budgets, so they have a confidence level of minus 30% to plus 50%. The estimates do include the site investigation, the engineering, the permitting, the construction, and the construction management. There are many factors that could impact the cost, and as we move forward, we'll be working closely with the state and federal agencies. There's the concept of the inflow design flood. This could decrease the cost. There's also the concept that there's the full PMF, and that would make the cost go up. There's also opportunity to do value engineering and look for ways to save money. On a dam-by-dam basis, when we're looking at the Sanford Dam, the approximate cost for that is $92 million. When we're looking at the Edenville Dam, approximately $208 million, Smallwood at $14 million, and Secord at $24 million. So that concludes the presentation on the flood study and the planning level opinion of costs. Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. Do you want to go to the next slide, Kayla? Just wanted to take a moment to point out that what we're looking at and reviewing today in terms of the finances are the current statement of financial condition. Most of the meeting and what Dave has alluded to, as well as Ron from costs and future funding and financing, is really about moving forward. In terms of the current statement of financial condition, this looks really at what we've received so far in terms of grants and donations, as well as expenditures to date. So what you're looking at before you in terms of the grant expenditures and so forth that I'm going to go through today really encompass much of the funding that was raised before the May 19th event, as well as those expenditures that related to our original objective of acquiring and repairing the dams as they existed. So I wanted to take a moment to first go through our MEDC grant, and wanted to make sure that everyone on the call understood that we have kind of two buckets or allocations of funding. One is what's called restricted assets, which is what the MEDC fund or grant is, and I'll go through that in a moment. And the other is unrestricted, and those are from private donations, from the lake associations, from family foundations, and from the Dow grant. So the MEDC grant is a restricted grant in that they require a certain allocation of expenditures to certain buckets. So you can see that we have an allocation toward consultants that include engineering, finance, PR, and legal. We have an allocation toward repairs and admin and acquisition. So the $5 million grant that you see was given to us in 2019. To date, we have spent a little over $2.75 million in consultants, including engineering and legal for the most part, along with that finance and public relations I just alluded to. We've spent nearly $400,000 on repairs of the dams, as well as $520,000 in acquisition. These were done in acting in good faith to acquire the dams as we were working with Boyce through the purchase agreement. And then finally we had a little under $38,000, $37.59 thousand in administrative costs. So again, I want to make sure that everyone understands that these are not all the 4 Lakes Task Force expenditures, but they're specifically expenditures that are out of the MEDC grant for that indicated period. And that's between January 2019 and July of 2020. So with that being said, we spent $3.7 million and we have $1.3 million remaining of that MEDC grant. So Kayla, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So in looking at the current financial position overall of the 4 Lakes Task Force, you can see to the left in the blue the MEDC grant, just under $1.3 million, we're running up to 1.3, along with the Dow grant of just under $150,000. We've received a Kepler Family Foundation erosion grant of $100,000. We've also received another private donation of $450,000. So the $1.3 million of the MEDC grant is to be spent within those grant guidelines. The $146,000 of the Dow is unrestricted. We have $94,000 remaining to be spent on that erosion control. And you heard Dave Rothman earlier with the erosion control fairs that we had earlier last month, I believe it was. And we also had Spicer Engineering help us by donating $20,000 or more of engineering support services during those fairs. We have $450,000 in private donations remaining, and those funds are also unrestricted. So we currently have just under $600,000 in payables. Those include the emergency actions that we had to take after the dam break and the flooding that had occurred. It includes equipment costs as well as engineering and legal that we continue to have as we look for a path forward. So currently we have net funds on hand of approximately 1.38 or just at $1.38 million. So I believe that in the next slide we're going to go back to the agenda, if I'm not mistaken, to serve as a framework so that we can open it up for questions. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we have, I think we're on time. We have about 30 minutes or so for Q&A. They'll still come in, and I think I was writing some that came down, so I'll get through these, and if you see some that I'm not covering, please work through that. There's several not small questions, but I can answer quickly just on kind of logistics. There's some questions on property value, the impact of property values on the lakes and how you can appeal that and stuff. That really is a county decision and discussion and being done, and so we don't have the it's really not within our authority to really bring it up here, but it is a discussion with the county that and your townships that you can have to work through to do. There's also some questions about, are you on the is your property on the list of erosion activities that Dave talked about? I would say if you haven't connected with the team either through the fairs or through the contacting us through the information that Dave provided, you're probably not on the list, and we encourage you to go back to the presentation, find the contact information, and get on there to work through that. Also, questions about just compensation for well loss and structure. The counties are working through that. You know, one of the things we're looking at long term is the water table issues and stuff, but short term we know people are have impact on wells. The counties have worked through that. There is some funding available through the NRSC, and we're looking at that, but that if you work through the county structure, we can get information on that so that gets diverted correctly to you. And so I think I got like the individual ones. If more come up, I can do that. Erosion permits was also there. We are trying to work with the DNR. In the on the website, there are kind of guidelines of what you can do without a permit. I think Eagle's been very flexible in terms of kind of making sure we understand what we need to do. And as we go through these programs, we're kind of working to make sure that we have repetitive processes so we don't have to get a permit for every owner. But basically, if you're just kind of repairing a seawall in place, lawn and grass, rock around the seawall, those kind of things are okay. As it starts to get more into the construction phase, you need permitting, and we're working with the DNR to make that as easy as we can and have processes so the homeowners don't have to do a lot of engineering and stuff like that to work through. So stay plugged in that. It's a very important area, and we're trying to get these funds with the NRSC now, NRCS now, and so tying into that to work through. So a few questions. Why did we pick a service life of 75? You know, when we're getting 2 or 3 reasons. We're looking at long term as you're going to build them. One is we believe that the current standards that are going to be required to get approval to bring these up and to keep running them are going to be at that kind of level. Second of all, that if you're going to start to fund things with this kind of money, you want to fund them over a very long period of time. And so you can't get a 40-year loan on a 20-year asset. So, and we really don't want to do this more than once in like 2 or 3 generations. So these dams lasted 100 years. They had been probably reinvested in over the last 30 years in a different way, they would be likely here. But they're not, and so now we have to do it, redo it, and do it right is the key thing to do. There's been a couple questions on would Dow or consumers buy the dam, or are they buying the dam? And the answer is no. And I'm not putting, there is no private model that that would put this to consumer or to Dow to buy those dams. And so when we looked at that, the issue becomes is the value is basically to the homeowners and the lake owners, and there's not a real, they're really, I would say consumers and Dow are very, very supportive. They've engaged with us. They're helping us with some funding. They've done some, so we're very positive about the relationships with the corporations, but they're not going to go spend $200 million on these dams, so just as a donation. And I want to just, there's a little rumor out there, people have asked about that, and we wanted to clear that up. But getting a lot of support from both companies, but that's not going to happen. The other question was, will do the lawsuits impact our ability to meet our objectives? They distract from it, and so in that vein they do. They don't, there's nothing that prevents us from moving forward and structuring it, but the Boise State issue is there. We don't feel that impedes us. What impedes us in this is the speed to get to clarity. We'll get the legal issues separated from the implementation issues. In these kind of events, our goal here, sounds silly, is to have more engineers working on this and lawyers. And right now we have a lot of legal issues around this that will clear, and then we can get focused. And we got a good legal team working on that to do. The question on if does why can't the Secord Dam? I wanted to read that if I have. Excuse me a second. Why can't the Secord Dam or Smallwood for that matter be risen up if we have the if we just get the repair done. I would encourage folks to look at the in the document library. There's not all the filings. We're starting to. I think we're getting to the point where we're just going to file everything we see that relates to these dams there, so people can look at them. But yesterday was a good point to make on this, and I just want to read it because this was about basically Smallwood. And so on August 14th, by August 14th, you must provide a supplementary report by TRC, which is the engineering firm that Boyce was using, addressing the comments in enclosure 2. There's 24 comments around planning, and provide a plan and schedule to address TRC's recommendations from the original inspection point, which was enclosure 1. That's 10 points. And so he's got till August 14th to go through and do all the reporting, and a lot of those are around actually testing and looking at the dam structure and stuff. And you are reminded that you may not return the reservoir to normal levels until and unless all the outstanding dam safety issues are satisfactorily addressed and you receive authorization from FERC. So this is a hydro dam with the federal authority. They have clearly, after this event, asked the water to draw down, are concerned about the integrity, as Ron showed the issues on these dams. They're worried about fixing that. So the authority to bring those dams up is with FERC, and the responsibility right now to repair those dams to the level and make sure they're safe that FERC will approve them to go up is Boyce. And that we believe is a challenge. The other question that's kind of, so I think that this is what I meant. So this is on Smallwood. On Secord, we don't have the report yet. I would expect that we would get a report like this in the next, within the next week or two, because when he filed the Smallwood report not too long ago, like on the 7th. So it usually takes a couple of weeks. When we get that, hopefully it's as complete as this one, and we'll be able to apply that. That's one of the reasons we're trying to work through that with FERC to make sure they're giving us information we make these decisions on. But the authority to bring that up right now, those waters right now, rest with FERC, and the responsibility to make sure they meet standards rest with Boyce. And we fundamentally feel that's going to be a problem going forward. It's created the situation we're in now. The other kind of issue here is the estimate between the $30,000 that Boyce has out and the number that Ron has out. I would say again, although Secord isn't tied into this report, it gives you an insight in it. If to fix one problem on Secord would I'm imagining that's what Boyce is referring to on the one of the tail walls or whatever. But I would say that, hey, we know that it doesn't meet spillway capacity. FERC knows it doesn't meet spillway capacity. Boyce had a plan that was due to for the Secord spillway capacity. The drawings that Ron showed were things that Boyce had turned over to us to do the work on. So he absolutely knows there's spillway capacity that's needed, and I don't know what Boyce is going to say about that. We also know that that $30,000 doesn't include any embankment study or review, and I'm imagining they're going to ask about that. So again, Boyce has the authority. They could have shared us with the information. They didn't share us a report. We had volunteered actually to have our GEI guys go out and do the surveys as well. That wasn't accepted. So there's just two sets of facts here. We believe ours are closer to the truth, and ours are a little longer term in terms of we got to build this thing so when we bring it up, we have the confidence in the state and federal government and our communities that we're not going to have an issue like this on these dams again. Why aren't we just paying Boyce? Why are we going through condemnation? Well, we tried, we offered. If you saw the numbers, which was another question, have we given money to Boyce? The money we gave to Boyce was the money that was put out in the state grant of the $100,000 that we applied towards the purchase price. We have done some improvements on the dam, like when we did the winter work last winter on Edenville. So we made an offer to Boyce. We believe that the current liability that's on the dam is greater than the value, and for him to not to have these things transition with there's a $6 million debt on it, so the bank's going to want $6 million, and to have him walk away from the obligations he has on these dams, and then us pay him a significant amount of money, it just doesn't make sense, and it's not the right thing to do. And so we've offered him to move through this process, and basically knowing that we would take on a lot of work, but not take over his liabilities, and he just doesn't want to do that. And so we're in the process now of taking that property. Any other questions coming up?
There's a lot of questions the effect of if we're not pursuing hydropower, does all the regulations go away?
Oh,
And I
okay.
just wrote some more down.
Yeah, so the difference between FERC and, no, regulations don't go away. It's just who applies them. So if we move away from FERC, then we are under the Part 307 for the water. There's 315 for safety. So we go under the state regulations. As Ron points out, there is some differences in the capacity levels, but I would say almost all the other requirements of the state are similar to FERC in terms of what's required to work on the state to drive. So when we would privately own the property, if we don't have hydro on it, it would, not privately, but the private or the lakes would be owned by the counties, and it's be under Part 307. That would end up basically being under the authority in terms of the Eagles in terms of a safety review and structure. And it's fundamentally the same kind of oversight and structure, a little different protocol, but same kind of standards, I would say. The difference is on these spillway capacity numbers and stuff to work through. As Ron says, you have to kind of modify the value of that from a safety point of view, and changing is that you can build these dams a little differently, and I think going forward, as we talked about it, a lot differently, and bring a safety aspect to it together. So there is a transition over that. The challenge is that these dams represent about 10 megawatts of power. I want to say, Don, it's about 3 or 4 windmills, I'm thinking, 2 windmills, okay? So this is not a material, so to put all this money in for hydro and add another $100 million, it just doesn't match the numbers to work with. So let me see if we've missed.
There's a new question, you will cover this, but you're touching it again. How much of a cut do board members Dave get from working on this?
Say that, how much?
So there's a question regarding
Compensation?
Do our board members get?
Well, Dave Rothman gets a lot of money, but the rest of us are working for no. I think we explained it before. We get no compensation. This is a volunteer board tied in from the lake associations, which are volunteer. I do not get any compensation for doing this. I live on the lake. I asked if I could help. My wife wonders sometimes why I asked that question, but we're in it now, and like everybody here, we appreciate also on the line, there's a lot of people asking to help to volunteer. This is basically, we need the experts and the knowledge and the experience, and so the people are pulling in there, but the oversight of this on this board is a volunteer board.
Is Secord going to have a lower crest, just having the level will be lower?
No. So lower, they weren't going to have a lower. Oh, spillway. Okay, so we're talking about lower spillway. So if you think about it, the spillway, if the spillway is here, by lowering it down, you're able to get more capacity through the spillway. That's what we're talking about. So the higher level doesn't change, but the lower level does, and so it's a lower level that gets moved down to give you more capacity in the gate. Did I do that? See, maybe we don't need engineers, Ron. I mean, we could just do this ourselves.
Can you comment on the Detroit News article about the dam, about the state not being inclined to support the dam?
The state not being aligned to rebuild the dams? Or?
Yeah.
No.
Not being inclined to support it.
Oh, no. So, yeah, there was an article in the paper about kind of tied to this that the Detroit News had produced a report based on a grant that we provided and got turned down for, that the state's not inclined to give to have these dams rebuilt. And I think you're connecting a lot of dots that aren't quite there. One is we tried to get a grant to repair the dams, and because we don't own the dams, that grant wasn't available to us, so we got turned down. Now, the portion of that money that's used to deal with high hazard dams from the state, most of that money, frankly, is biased to removing dams. And so when you usually go in, it's for the community that's had a small dam that's got a problem, and they just want to clear it out. And so we could have used the same mechanism to go ask to go tear down the dam, but you can use it to rebuild the dam. But clearly it's a little more challenging because most of these are of the 1,000 dams in Michigan, I think, or more. When they meet their end of their life, they're basically removed. That is not our objective. And so I think a lot of these things get connected with about 4 or 5 connections that just aren't correct. So there was a grant that we tried to get. We couldn't get it, not because we were trying to repair the dam. We were trying to basically, we didn't own it, so we were trying to explain that maybe we own it in the future, but they didn't. So we're going to. Okay, so I'm hoping everybody's hearing me. Are you checking that, or everybody's saying we're back? Good to hear you. Great job. Okay, one of the questions was assessments, and honestly, when we had this the last time before May 29th, this was a contentious issue of who pays. We said that time that we'd figure it out afterwards in terms of what was fairly allocated. I would say none of us can afford this if we don't work together because we need this extra money. But we've also in the presentation said that we're not going to have, these are such big numbers that we're clearly not going to get to a point where some lake owner is going to have to pay 5 times more or whatever we have to do. We don't have a methodology yet, and we're not going to speculate on what it's going to be. We know we have an affordability issue here, and we know that this number is probably going to be higher than the number we had before, but we have to make sure there's too many variables to set the number yet, and but clearly we're not going to get to the point where we'll look at these lake by lake and make a decision on the investment number and make sure it's fair and make sure we understand the affordability of the community to work on this. Yeah. So there's a lot of questions about Secord. I understand the challenge on both Secord and Smallwood in that while they had incidents in terms of Ron pointed out flooding and not staying in containment, and the view that there's a lot higher challenge on this. There is a Secord Lake Association meeting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock if you go to their website. I'm sorry, start over. 10 a.m. on Friday morning. Okay, start over again, Dave. Saturday. So Saturday at 10 a.m., look at the Secord Lake Association website, and they have a Zoom meeting scheduled. All the board members from Secord, Carl and Phil, and then Joel from Gladwin County and myself will be at that meeting as well to go to specific issues on Secord. I think I answered the specific questions. I see some of, can they raise the water without repairs? The answer is no, and why not is the structure I said, until the FERC says it can be raised, it can't be raised. And we are trying to get better clarity from FERC because we can't get it from Boyce in terms of what the actual repairs FERC sees. And I would expect to have a clearer view on that when FERC's response comes out probably in a week or two. But our anticipation is that that dam is going to have to deal with a spillway issue that's significant, and it's going to have to deal with an embankment issue, which is significant. And the thing that's changed between now and, say, 4 months ago is that the embankment failed on Edenville, and obviously there's concern about the same issue happening on Secord, and there has to be study to that. And it's not just about ignoring it to work through. Now I got your boyfriend calling or something.
Is there any way to be able to timeline?
We put a timeline in the table. Our view is to do the repairs and stuff to get through the. I don't see a feasible way that the lakes come up this year, and I really doubt that they'll come up in 2022. And so the lines we put in was a optimistic thing that we can stage repairs earlier for those dams than we can on the other two dams, which are going to be significant upgrades and probably managed together. And that will be dependent on us getting the dams, getting a plan together, getting FERC's buy-in, and working through that. And probably in this, we have to if it's not on hydro anymore because of some of the issues that Boyce has with the license or with consumers, then we'll have to look at non-hydro. So the timetable in the presentation is what we believe is a realistic timetable. Will we like to move it up earlier? Yes. Will we try to do each dam to do as best as we can on each one? Yes. But I don't want to overpromise people on something that we can't deliver on. And I would tell you that the schedule in there today is a aggressive schedule, and it's really dependent, if you read the slides, on us getting the property, on everybody working together, on getting the government funding, and getting things lined up. And so we're not making a commitment right now. We have a plan, but the plan is only going to be good if we can get to sometime in April and May and have a plan we can bring in front of the state that's credible, financeable, and has community backing behind it. And we're going to spend the next 6 months or so really working with the community for them to understand that while we're building through this plan. So a lot of getting this stuff done is what happens in the next 2 months and how fast we can get together to make sure we address these issues. And so that's why I think we want to continue to have more communications. Like I said, we'll do dam by dam on each one of these things. We can go through the lake associations and deal with some of the issues, but we really want to sit down and have people understand the state of being of their dams and what has to change going forward. And we'll work through that one by one. But I would just simply say that it has to be managed in a way with all the structure and interfaces we have with government and structure. It just will not happen over the next 6 months if we don't work on it together. Yeah, just well, I don't know how you answer why we need the bottomlands to have a lake without the bottomlands. I had some questions about weeds on the bottomlands. We actually want weeds on the bottomlands, or we want native grass on the bottomlands to help the erosion while we're going through this. So we're actually probably going to spray, we're looking at spraying native grass on the bottomlands to actually stop the erosion as we get to the lakes and stuff to work through. That's a project we're trying to get through the NRCS as well to work through. I'm running out of big questions. Does the board have anything that they want to bring up or anything? Well, like I said, you got some more or what? Oh, we'll go through that, yeah. So we didn't answer all the questions. The meeting has been recorded. That recording will go online. The material will go online with the engineering report. It's about 60 or 70 pages, the PMF report, and these presentations. And again, these numbers are windage numbers in terms of what we're trying to look at. We've had very good people look at these things based on decades of experience in this, and this is the range they're giving us and the things we need to work on and the kind of issues that we've seen in our diligence on the dams before they failed, and we need to see the reports afterwards. So with that, we're going to close off the Q&A session, and again, we'll be posting those and structuring those around that. And I don't know if I pointed it out, but I know there's a lot of questions out there that sometimes hard to find. We've got a whole FAQ section we're really building. We're putting a search area on the website and stuff to work through.
Thanks for watching, and make sure you hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next videos I will be posting, and leave your questions, comments, and suggestions below.